Let's see what we got. Joe Budden was right about Drake 15 years ago. Yeah, Joe Budden was the first nigga to ever diss Drake and go at Drake in the hip hop community when everybody else was scared. Before Kendrick Lamar the first time on the Control verse.
When you sub real MC, I'm not a one hit wonder, they know all my stuff. When you sub real MC, you get murdered. And since you signed to Five Guys, make sure you curve.
Joe Budden and Drake are two sides of the same coin. While Drake is largely credited for rewriting the blueprint for vulnerability within hip-hop, it was all off a formula that Joe had originally concocted. But while Drake weaponized and capitalized off that vulnerability, Joe spent his career being so brutally honest that the industry didn't know whether to sign him or run from him.
Hear me and hear me good. I'm here to double down. That shit is a two-pack of ass.
Drake will smile in a rapper's face for years on end and then sing at their funeral. Meanwhile, Joe will tell you he hates you before you've even finished shaking his hand.
What do you want me to say? You want me to say?
I want you to be aware of your business. I want you to appreciate the culture that changed your life. I want you who's well-spoken and articulates himself well.
Chill.
Yeah, he just said it's not that
So it's no
serious, nigga,
surprise
chill.
that in 2026, 17 years after Drake and Joe Budden initially met, while Joe will hop on his podcast and claim that he loves Drake, the general consensus within the music industry
That's
is
that love-hate shit I be talking about with him and Ack and him and Charlamagne. Like, they be acting like nigga like Drake or act like they like each other when really they be hating each other. They really don't, they tolerate each other. I see this in the last couple of videos. These niggas be tolerating each other. It's a love-hate relationship with
that
these niggas.
Joe is in fact Drake's biggest hater, with some even going as far
That's a
as
fact,
claiming
that's a fact.
that Joe is on Kendrick and TDE's payroll.
Yo, I am not being paid by TDE. I have never been paid by TDE. I've never been paid by any artist. I can't be bought.
Now, you might not believe me,
That's a lie.
but Joe Budden might be equally or even more calculated than Drake. And what if I told you that not only did a large portion of Drake's early style and flow derive from Joe Budden's blueprint, but a large arsenal of lyrical ammo that Kendrick and Pusha T used in their rap battles against Drake also derived from a formula and diss records that Joe Budden had first concocted. Joe Budden has studied Drake's career very carefully, and that is why he is one of the hardest targets that Drake has ever had to shake off. But in order to understand that, we gotta understand how these two titans even got their footing within the music industry in the first place.
People be hating that shit of Wayne show. He doing all that rock star shit, yelling and nigga, we want that old school Wayne back. I want that old Wayne when he was go DJing and
In
shit on stage
2002,
with the
Drake
baggy
was a
clothes.
teen
That
actor
type of
on a
Wayne.
Canadian
Not that yelling
sitcom
shit.
called Degrassi, where he would begin to dabble into music. Meanwhile,
Where else, Joey, would you have him going so crazy?
and it wouldn't just be fans
Hate
who
that
pointed
dude.
this out. The Canadian hip-hop scene at the time was very small. So if one rapper was sending subliminals, they were likely easy to catch. Now pay attention, because this will tie back to Joe Budden. Because before we break down his beef with Drake, we gotta look at what I believe is Drake's very first beef as an actual rapper. Now, Drake actually won this beef so badly that his opponent ended up scraping his diss records so thoroughly off the internet that to this day, you can't even find them. This is a post on Reddit from 2 years ago in their Lost Media section.
You know?
Nah, man, it's not me, bro.
Now, Drake would also claim that him and Aristo originally were supposed to do a record together. Aristo had told
Never
him
heard of
that
that
he
nigga
sounded
Aristo.
like
And I
Kanye
see
West, and
why.
Drake took it as a compliment. But once Aristo drops the Swagnificent record where he says
nobody ever
Drake
heard.
sounds like Budden, basically calling Aristo a failed artist, but also sending a straight
about
in
Aristo, nigga? We
April.
don't know
Drake
that
would
nigga?
find himself already headfirst within the industry, mingling with other artists at events, and he would meet Joe Budden for the very first time in New York at Joe's girlfriend Tahiri's birthday party. Remember that
Then
name,
start fucking
Tahiri,
with Tahiri.
'cause
It's fucked
Drake
up.
knew her too.
And I
If you know
believe it's
anything
all
about
over a girl, which is Tahiri, which all Drake beats be over. But he be doing some down bad scumbag shit. You hear me? See your man. Oh, you ain't with it no more. Let me hear him go.
Drake,
Nah,
there's
bro,
always a
down
little
bad.
risk involved when he knows your girlfriend.
That's a fact. He down bad.
At the time, Joe Budden was very early on the internet content creation game. Long before the internet was even a thing, he had actually dabbled in being a radio personality. But ultimately, his record label told him, you gotta pick a lane, either be a rapper or a radio broadcaster. But he never actually put down the camera. And this night was no different. Joe Budden captured history on this street corner right outside his girlfriend's birthday party. He documented his very first time meeting Drake. See, Joe Budden recognized Drake's potential very early on.
On the
And
corner of his
in this
girl
clip,
house?
they're kind of
That's-
celebrating
that's
the
weird.
moment. Everything Drake had accomplished. As again, this was just a month after So Far Gone release. So Drake was on the cusp of superstardom.
So unfortunately, as I was uploading this video, I got hit with like 8 million copyright strikes just for using the clip of Joe Budden meeting Drake for the first time. So I can't actually show it, but I could summarize it because it's crazy. Outside the party, Joe basically predicts Drake's future. He told Drake that one day a rapper would diss him hard enough that he would feel forced to respond. Drake said that would never happen and that if someone dissed him, they would never see a reply for it. But Joe was right. And the ironic part is that in this clip, Drake says that the industry tried to pit him up against Kid Cudi since they were both melodic rappers coming up at the same time. But years later, when Pusha T pushed Drake into a beef, just like Joe predicted some rapper would, Drake ended up dissing Kid Cudi in the same song that he was dissing Pusha T, same guy that he said he wanted no problems with. And that's why this clip feels so important. It was Joe nearing the end of his rap career, Drake about to become a superstar, and Joe essentially warning
Yeah, I'm about to
Drake
say
of
Drake
what the
started
industry
feeling
would turn
himself
him
around
into.
that
You guys
time.
can
He
check
was
it out
like,
for
"Nigga,
yourselves,
I'm better
but
than
now
Kid
back
Cudi. Kid Cudi started slowing down, wearing off. You're like, man, fuck that nigga.
to the video.
Just a couple months later, Drake would blow up astronomically. And
Crazy,
while
yeah.
he did so, he went on a massive feature run doing songs with some of the biggest artists in the game, like Jay-Z, Timbaland, Alicia Keys, Jamie Foxx, and a lot more. So when he's asked in an interview if him and Joe Budden will ever do a collab together, even though early on Drake took a lot of inspiration
Fake-ass
from
weights.
Joe, he was pretty quick to say that Joe would not be getting a feature from him anytime soon because he was much more focused right now on working with bigger artists. He would also admit that in that clip, where him and Joe met for the first time at Tahiri's birthday party, Drake himself was a little nervous.
My man's humble right here. And I knew that as soon as I saw you on Joe Budden
Real Drake right
TV. When he caught you outside there. That was funny right there.
Yeah, man, you know, but
Before all that money
we
started
joke
hitting the
around a lot.
fame,
Yeah,
So I was probably like, you know, he make TVs.
money be
I was
disguising
probably
that
a little
shit.
nervous. They was say some crazy shit.
Can we expect a song? You should do a song with Joey, man.
Yeah, you know, I mean, right now, a lot
I'm
of
sure everyone wants to do a song with
yeah, and there's a lot of we already have a lot of, you know, bullets in the gun, so to speak.
Yeah.
Not to be violent or anything, but like, you know, we got bullets in the gun, so I just gotta let a couple shots off, you know, as far as features, you know, that are waiting to come out, like big things that will be great looks for me.
They say big,
In the
big, big
meantime,
names.
the tables would turn.
Not no
As
fucking
Drake
Joe
got bigger,
Buttons.
slightly off the blueprint that Joe Budden had first laid down, he would quickly overshadow Joe in popularity, which would end up making some fans
Joe was
have
a boring
revisionist
ass
history.
rapper.
You could see it
Pump
in
It
the
Up was
reaction to
trash.
new Joe Budden music
I
in
said it.
2010 when Drake was already a massive artist. Not much changed stylistically on what Joe was doing by 2010 versus what he was doing in like 2007 when people used to say that Drake was copying him. But now fans were getting it confused, thinking that it was actually Joe biting Drake because Drake had just ran off with the style and got so big. People forgot
Took
who
a
was
nigga
doing
shit.
it first.
Give me that.
You could see some Joe Budden fans clapping back at all the other commentators who were saying that Joe was trying to run off with Drake's style. These guys were saying Joe Budden is a real MC. Drake is an actor impersonating a Lil Wayne flow. Or this other guy saying, I'm laughing at the idea you guys are trying to paint that Joe Budden is acting like Drake. F out of here. Joe Budden's been had that flow way back since mood music started. How about Drake stop trying to act like Wheezy or Big Sean? Ever thought of that? And it's definitely true
definitely
that by
used
this
to try
point
to
in
act
time
like
in
Wayne,
2010,
but Wayne
like
had
Drake
to
was
tell him
rapping a
stop
lot
that
more
shit.
like Lil Wayne or Kanye than he was like Joe Budden. But if one thing's for sure, it's that the game was changing. Joe Budden's rap group Slaughterhouse even did a record in 2009 where they were writing a farewell letter to hip-hop, mainly due to their frustrations on the direction of where the genre was headed. And the description on Rap Genius of this track even names the release of Drake's breakout mixtape So Far Gone as the big reason for the shift that Slaughterhouse was frustrated with.
Slaughterhouse was trash.
And the narrative
too,
that Joe Budden was
them
biting Drake
niggas, that
would only
music.
get worse. Joe
Verse to
actually
five,
got Drake's
trash.
mentor Lil Wayne on his 2012 single She Don't Put It Down, which was a relatively mild hit, but the beat was a complete knockoff of Drake's song I'm On One with the same producer T-. And for someone who was so respected as an MC as Joe was, to go this more radio mainstream route this late in his
bet that
career,
shit still ain't
well,
do nothing.
fans of mood music didn't take it lightly, and people were writing eulogy articles on Joe's career.
This woman in Kansas City
I
searched
never
her
heard
name
like
and
a
found $6.1
radio
million in
smash of
unclaimed
Joe
money.
Budden
Like,
besides
what?
Pump It Up,
Wait,
and
you
that
don't know
Pump It
about
Up shit
unclaimed
was
money?
only
This is
good
something
because
everybody
it
should
was
know
like
about. The
on
government may
games,
owe you.
dingy.
I'm just trying to
Def
paint
Jam
the picture for you
Vendetta,
guys
movies,
that
shit
as
like
the
that,
new
but
decade would
I didn't like the
emerge
song
and
at all.
Drake would emerge to the top of the game,
overhyped
Joe Budden was
to this
kind of
day.
trying to tread water, and the narratives around his music were a lot different than they were in the 2000s. This is an excerpt from that eulogy article. They say, it can get much worse. What's a more awful proposition? That Drake wrote Joe Budden's verse on this song? Or that Joe Budden wrote such a blatantly awful knockoff of a Drake song? I'm leaning more towards the idea that Joe wrote it. Drake has been killing guest spots all year, and this uninspired half-baked club Drek that Joe Budden just put out is way beneath Drake. Interview that her and Drake were quote-unquote getting to know each other and evented him, and he was starting to understand that. He took a role on the TV reality show Love and Hip Hop, joining as a main cast member in January of 2013 with his girlfriend at the time, the same one who had that birthday party that Joe first met Drake at, Tahiri. See, Joe had been dating Tahiri on and off since around
Drake wanted Tahiri back then at the birthday party. Why you think he was there, nigga?
2005. But I want to emphasize, they were on and off, because in 2011, Tahiri actually claimed in a Vlad TV interview that her and Drake were quote-unquote getting to know each other, and eventually things didn't work out, but they were still
he
cool.
Smashed and then he,
If you guys
dipped.
followed this story, you probably know the
Smash,
famous
dip, and
picture
ain't
of
even talk
Drake
to
and
her no
Tahiri around this time period swimming with dolphins. Well, regardless of that, Joe Budden and Drake are still pretty cool as well, it seems like, on the surface. They both frequent the strip clubs. There's pictures of them smoking hookah together. They end up building mutual connections with a lot of the same women.
I ain't know they
Tahiri
used to
was
kick
just
it.
one of many, but if you know Drake, again, like I mentioned earlier, you know he has a strategy of using the women around the men that are his opposition against those men. And you'll see that pop up again later in this story. For now, Joe and Tahiri showcase their turbulent relationship on Love and Hip Hop, and that turbulence capitulates when Joe Budden ends up proposing to Tahiri in their second season on the show. Tahiri ends up saying no.
This is
Boy, I
wrong.
got off that
I
ground
need you.
quick.
I don't want to spend another day without you.
Come on, Joe, don't do it. Don't. Please, 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 please.
She
Will you
telling
marry
me,
me?
don't do it.
Love is trust. And I don't trust you right now.
That's a no.
That's a no.
Now,
nigga.
if you rewind about a year
Damn.
before this proposal,
On TV,
even though
it's
Drake and
crazy.
Tahiri may have had a little fling for a little bit and then she went back to Joe, it didn't seem to cause a public rift between Joe and Drake. Aside from those pictures of Joe and Drake smoking hookah together on a couch in 2013 after Drake had had his little fling with Tahiri, you also get Joe
she's
pen
so
up a
familiar. I forgot what her
response to
name is or
Kendrick
what I
Lamar
know
for
her
his
from.
Control verse, where Joe is rapping on the Control beat and actually bigs up Drake in order to slight Kendrick Lamar. There's so much irony in this entire story, right? I mean, in 2026, you have people talking about Joe is on the TDE payroll, you know, trying to spread propaganda
Back then,
about
he
Kendrick
was
to tear
with
Drake
Drake
down.
shitting on
But back in
Kendrick.
2013, he's rapping on the Control beat, somewhat kind of taking shots at Kendrick, claiming he's not king in New York, but even worse, saying that Drake washed Kendrick on the two collaborations that they had together, Poetic Justice and Effin' Problems. He rapped, "Keep it funky, Drake washed you twice." By 2015, Joe and Tahiri obviously had their ugly public breakup, abuse allegations. It ended in a very dark way, but 2015, Joe is saying that he had actually given Drake his blessing to date Tahiri. He didn't care about it. He emphasized that him and Drake were friends and they've had confidential conversations about women, so them dating the same woman was no big deal to Joe.
Did you ever text Harry like a word?
No, I hit Drake.
Really?
I said, yo, don't
Sound
think
like
that I'm
you
one
talking
of
to
the sucker ass
Charlamagne.
that's gonna be mad about that. Like, I want you to know it's okay.
You gave it your blessing.
And he said, I would be mad if you didn't feel that way. It was one of those.
What about when you
No, no, not giving my blessing. I don't need to give my blessing to two grown adults.
You felt like it was your place to do that? Like you...
I needed to let him know that.
Got you.
Because him and I had a relationship, or some semblance of a relationship.
Yeah.
So I just needed to let him know.
It's not awkward.
I'm cool. Yeah, that's not awkward for me.
Do you do that for rap purposes? Like just in case y'all battle later? Like you can't never use this against me because I told you it was okay.
No. Well, him and I have had confidential conversations
cool
about women. That's why I did it. We've kicked it that way.
There's a person to talk to about bartenders. It's Joe. Tri-State. It's Joe Budden.
It's definitely Joe.
So shout out to
Well, why are you saying bar? I'm saying women.
Now, before Drake and Joe would kind of go head to head in their own battle, Drake, of course, had a different opponent first. Remember back in 2009, Joe told Drake, at some point, someone will fire a shot at you and you will feel forced to respond. Well, that first came with Meek Mill. Meek Mill, of course, accused Drake of using ghostwriters, and Drake would respond with not one, but two separate diss records, unanimously winning that battle. Joe Budden would support Drake amidst his back-to-back victory. He would tweet out at Meek Mill saying, Meek makes really good music, but this clearly is not his lane. Get back to you, my guy. You got the girl and you just had the #1 album, but you're walking into a trap wearing a blindfold. No hate, I promise. Joe would even send his praises to Drake for the great strategy Drake implemented in that battle, saying, Drake planned artwork, sent bottles to a man that he hates, aka Charlemagne, and coordinated with the Blue Jays Phillies series. He's clearly thinking. And the funny thing is, Joe would dedicate the majority of the 24th ever episode of his podcast. It literally didn't even have a name yet. It was called I'll Name This Podcast Later. Most of it was spent actually breaking down this beef. This was before Drake dropped back to back. He had only dropped Charged Up, but Meek Mill already seemed like he was about to lose. Now, keep in mind, Joe Budden and Meek, I don't believe they were seen eye to eye with each other either at the time. So they're joking around on the podcast saying that maybe Meek will have some bars for Joe as well. Joe says if that's the case, he would turn off the podcast mic and immediately get in the booth to demolish Meek. And Rory, who was still on the podcast at the time, had said that, you know, if Joe doesn't end up using his bars in a diss track against Meek, he could just give them to Drake. And Joe would emphasize, again, this is right when Drake got called out for using ghostwriters. Joe would defend Drake, saying that Drake is a great enough writer on his own. He doesn't need anybody's help, including Joe's.
In the event that my name would have been said, I would be in the studio right now instead of recording this podcast, and I would have a reply out this morning.
Well, if you don't rap them, sell them to Drake.
On the next episode of the podcast, Joe would continue foreshadowing things, saying that he was bored of the Drake and Meek beef because Meek just wasn't a worthy opponent, but instead, he wanted to see Drake go at Pusha T. Remember, by this point, we're in 2015. Pusha T had released a diss record against Drake, Lil Wayne, and Birdman in 2012 called Exodus. Really, he had been going after Wayne, going after Drake for years by this point. Rory suggests that maybe Pusha T looked at the Drake and Meek battle and realized, Drake is a more worthy opponent than I thought, based off how he handled the Meek beef. But Joe shuts that down, emphasizes that, yeah, Drake won, but it's like he beat the Knicks. Like, he didn't beat that strong of a team. Pusha T would be more than well prepared for a battle against Drake. And, in fact, the whole Drake and Meek Mill beef had actually made Joe revisit Pusha T's diss Exodus 23-1, and he realized that that was one of the hardest diss records that he could remember, even though this was just off the cusp of Drake dropping back-to-back. So you can already see Joe is showing Drake some love, but still kind of counterbalancing it out by emphasizing there are some opponents who have the potential to absolutely crush Drake.
I don't even want to talk about Meek and Drake anymore. If we were to see a beef, since hip-hop has been so great these past 2 weeks, I just want to see Pusha and Drake one time.
Oh, that would be amazing.
I'm not saying Push would be rethinking now, but I'm sure Push does not have the same mentality that he did before.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
I think Push will live for something
Wasn't
like
what we
this.
thought it was going to be.
Because he just showed how strategic he takes and serious he takes these rap beefs.
Against a guy who can't rap.
Pusha is a beast.
Well, first of all, I'm not suggesting Pusha can't rap, and I think that would be an amazing battle. I'm just saying Push may be a little bit like, oh, all right, he can do this.
Okay.
Before, I didn't think he could do that at all.
I don't think that Pusha is looking at that potential beef any differently than he did. Drake did very well against the fucking Knicks. You beat the Knicks, my nigga. But all of this Drake and Meek shit just really made me go listen to Exodus like a million times.
After back-to-back, Drake would only get bigger. And while he always dipped his toes into multiple genres, it seemed like, at this point, his mind was more set than ever on achieving that pop star status that a Rihanna or a Taylor Swift had. And while that was kind of hard to see the status that a Rihanna or a Taylor Swift had than ever on achieving that pop star status that...
Sheesh, I ain't never seen that.
that a Rihanna or a Taylor Swift had. And while that was kind of hard to see because Drake had just came off a rap battle, a rap mixtape with If You're Reading This It's Too Late, and a trap music collab tape with Future on What a Time to Be Alive, it was Joe Budden who very early on predicted that Drake would take a little detour, sacrificing lyrics and substance for bubblegum pop hits. Most of you guys probably know that Joe and Drake's beef reached a boiling point when Joe was very critical about Drake's album Views. And yeah, after that episode of the podcast where Joe craps on Views, nothing was ever the same, no pun intended. But I decided to take a look at a couple episodes earlier in the podcast and get a closer look at how Joe was thinking Drake would approach this project before it actually released. If you guys don't remember, a couple weeks before Drake dropped Views, he dropped 2 singles, Pop Style with Jay-Z and Kanye West, and his biggest hit of his career, One Dance.
I don't remember Pop Style.
I remember when he dropped these singles, like, the writing on them definitely felt very underwhelming. You had bars like, got so many chains, they call me Channing Tatum. And beyond that, they just didn't feel like as big of a moment as, you know, lead singles for Drake albums in the past did, like a Headlines or Over or Hold On, We're Going Home. Anyways, enough about me, back to Joe Budden. So these 2 singles drop, and it leads Joe to question where Drake is at in his career, basically theorizing that maybe these singles were an indicator that Drake had already hit his peak. He emphasizes that early on, he actually advised Drake to stick to the route he was on with his breakout mixtape, So Far Gone. That was at a time where Joe felt like Drake was more introspective and was starting the trends rather than hopping on whatever was hot at the time.
Have we seen Drake peak? I think that question has been floating around the universe for a little while. Very early on in mine and Drake's strip club careers, we've seen each other. And I went up to him and I saluted him. But early on, it's very early on. I said, yo, you know me and you were supposed to do a record. And he said, oh, well, let's do it. And I said, not say now. And he said, why not? And I said, well, because you're on everything. Like, you on it is almost like a single now. You're a fucking superstar. Not quite what I had in mind when I first heard you. So if we do it, I would like it to be
the saddest record of all time.
What you and I truly do. And when I say that, I mean what I first heard you do that I was so amazed at. That's important for me to let y'all know who I am.
Now, I think a lot of the back and forth between Joe and Drake that we'll review in this video shortly stems from Drake being overly sensitive to Joe's criticisms, and that's highlighted with the way Joe prefaces any time that he is actually critical of Drake. He emphasizes that he holds Drake in a higher echelon of artists, right? He compares Drake to the music that Drake has made in the past, the same way he would do with a Kanye or a Jay-Z. They're basically judged on a higher level, held to a higher standard, and when you're holding someone's artistry to a higher standard, bars like got so many chains they call me Channing Tatum are not gonna cut it. So Joe calls this new single a hot pocket version of Drake's Nothing Was the Same single, All Me.
Drake,
Yay and Hove. Maybe I misheard, I'm sorry.
I didn't like that record.
Hove. All I'm saying is those 3 men are phenomenal. If those are the 3 names that I'm hearing on a record, that's not the record I want to hear. I hate everything about it.
It's like a microwave blessings. That's what it sounds like.
It's like Hot Pocket blessings.
What was that whack ass line? Chaining to Tatum.
I don't want to hear
on Chaining Tatum.
Chaining Tatum.
Joe amps up the criticism here. Remember, this is right off the heels of Drake doing all those Metro Boomin and Future collaborations. And Joe says he hates trapper Drake, the Drake making all that trap music, and now he's also getting tired of dancehall Drake. And it's funny because this is way back in 2016 when Drake had barely touched the surface of infiltrating the dancehall community. So if Joe was tired of it then, it would only get worse.
I also hate, the same way I hate trapper Drake, I'm not tired of dancehall Drake. Nah.
What has been a bad dancehall record?
None of them. Rory, it's Drake and it's dancehall. It's never gonna be a bad record. It's never gonna be a bad record.
I mean, I only like the 1 or 2 the dance hall ones that he made.
How Giant or Zaxby's Giant Raps, they're packed with 3 famous fingers and plenty of sauce.
So man, Giant, they need their own zip code. So Giant,
that's fucked up. Now, ultimately, this whole debate is wrapped around the idea that Drake had possibly already reached his peak by that point in his career. And Joe speculates further that many people consider Take Care to be Drake's best album. That was when The Weeknd was heavily contributing to Drake's sound. The Weeknd left after that project, and The Weeknd seemed to be doing great for himself, for his own career. Joe is not really stating, but more so questioning whether or not this was when the quality of Drake's music was on the decline.
Well, I mean, if I go in deep, I start with the mumblings of a Weeknd Drake beef. I'm going that far back. If I'm taking that side of the argument, I'm putting the peak at Take Care.
And that was the album that The Weeknd was heavily involved in. Right?
And all I know that happened after that is that The Weeknd left. And I know that The Weeknd has done rather well since leaving, music-wise.
Since Take Care, I think Weeknd has a better album than Drake has put out since Take Care.
1,000%. I don't think that can be argued.
So as you can see, before the Joe and Drake beef started from the podcast where Joe was crapping on Views the album, he was already setting up the stage for the project to be placed under a microscope and heavily criticized on his podcast. He's already mentioning here, 3 weeks before Views came out, that he's holding Drake to a higher standard, to the standard he holds a Jay-Z or a Kanye West. He's already pointing to the fact that he believes from a quality standpoint, Drake's music had been on the decline. He doubles down on the fact that there is more pressure than ever here to deliver something that wouldn't just be a hit for Drake's standards, but would define a new sound, a new element, a new chapter of Drake's career. And judging off the singles that Drake had put out up to that point in anticipation of the album, you could tell Joe already felt like it might end up being a disappointment.
If there were ever a time to say, if Drake is the DH, we need a hit, I don't mean hit as in hit record, because he does that. In baseball terminology, the DH is the designated hitter. His only job is to hit. A lot of people would say, and I'm seeing it more than I've ever seen it, that he would need to really deliver on Views. I don't know what the or what is when you're at that level of success. So that was point number one. And what I'm also saying is number two, I just miss the Drake that started the waves, not carried the other ones. I like Controller and I like One Dance. But if I had a nickel for every time some random reggae nigga took that hard dance hall beat and just started mumbling some shit, and I loved it, I'd be a billionaire. So now if I'm taking the greatest rapper, many say today, because Drake today, I think is akin to Jay from my generation. And if somebody wants to debate me there, I'm open for that one too.
So you notice that Joe is treading water here, but he's making his opinion very clear. He puts a little disclaimer every time he critiques Drake's music and emphasizes that he's not saying the music is bad, it's just that he holds Drake to, again, a higher standard. He looks at Drake the way he looked at Jay-Z for the previous generation. But simultaneously, the line is blurred between, is Joe complimenting Drake? Is Joe hating on Drake? Or are these backhanded compliments? Because while he says all this, he also says Drake is the greatest thief in music since Jay-Z.
That nigga definitely still.
I'm one of the first people to say Drake follows in the whole blueprint of wave stealing. Hove is the best wave stealer of all time. If somebody would like to debate me on that, I'm talking musically, I don't mean image-wise.
That's why he don't get invited.
Again, Joe puts a lot of disclaimers on how much he loves Drake, how high of a regard he holds Drake, and even the fact that him and Drake are friends. So all this criticism about Drake's music is not coming from a malicious standpoint. It's coming from a fan who just wants to see their favorite artist continue to move the culture forward. He even emphasizes or admits that, maybe he's just out of touch because he's older at this point and can't understand the vision behind these new dumbed down, more poppy singles that Drake had just put out.
If you are a fan of Drake the way I have been since before So Far Gone, you cannot defend the Channing Tatum. I also get
keep on
that
bringing up that
I have
Channing
to maybe
Tatum.
open my brain up. There may be an audience, and I'm sure there is. I know I'm old, I may just be out of touch. And this shit could be the most firest shit in the universe, and I could just be the only one thinking different. But the same way that there's a big campaign about missing the old Kanye, I am starting to miss the old Drake. And since none of you fucktards will say it, and Drake already knows that I love him, so I'm gonna just throw this out there and be who I am. Sometimes you will take the garbage if you like the garbage man.
That's a cold bar he just spat right there. Sometimes we'll accept the trash because we like the garbage man. But nevertheless, Joe kept his expectations high, emphasizing that he did not believe up to that point in time that Drake had made his best album yet. He thought the best was yet to come.
I don't want Views to sound like Take Care #1.
Well, it can't.
I think that Drake is talented enough to make his best album soon. I don't think he's made his best album if I'm just going off of his talent.
So as you can see, even though Joe had his doubts from the music Drake had been releasing over the past year, he kept his hopes high and a very open mind when it came to discussing what he expects from Drake's new album, Views. And by the time the album actually released, I'm personally not really sure why people thought it was such a hot take that Joe was really disappointed by it. I was a pretty big Drake fan before Views as well, and I agree with a lot of what Joe said on that podcast that started his whole beef with Drake. Drake didn't sound inspired. The only real risks he took were going in more of a pop-leaning direction, but on those poppy songs, the writing was so stripped back and formulaic, it didn't feel like something that could move you like even some of Drake's older pop hits, Find Your Love, Hold On We're Going Home, Jungle. He had teased the album for years before it came out. It was supposed to be this kind of homage or a concept album dedicated to life in Toronto, right? And he's still talking about those same concepts he was talking about when he was that kid in Toronto, right? Like navigating fame, his exes, trust issues that he has, paranoia, but he wasn't really exploring these topics with the depth that he was on maybe songs like Club Paradise.
Yeah,
he didn't really sound like he evolved as a person, as a writer. I was underwhelmed personally when this project came out. And so was Joe. And being that Joe emphasized a million times how much he loved Drake, it was obvious that his disappointment would result in a lot of shouting on the podcast that came right after Drake dropped Views.
I think that kid on that album that I heard sounds real uninspired. I think that music is real good. You can fool the people that are not paying attention. That music sounds good and I enjoy it. 40, you sound amazing. 40 continues to progress. Drake, you do not.
I'm launching my website, but I need the right name.
That boy, he owns something right there.
On Wix domains.
That nigga owns some shit.
So you see how exactly what Joe's saying here would go on to pan out in terms of Drake's entire career, right? Each one of them stood for something unique in their music and message. But Drake at this point was kind of just becoming a product of the most recent Now, of course, this whole thing stemmed from the fact that Joe was just a big Drake fan and felt like Drake had lacked some inspiration lately. And if that was the case, Joe may have been the reason for Drake's inspiration being reignited. Because he would release his timestamp record 4 p.m. in Calabasas, very bar heavy, and a couple of those bars may have been directed at Joe. It's very subliminal, but remember in those podcast clips I played you guys earlier, Joe Budden kept calling Drake the golden boy, right? The golden child. He was the next Jay-Z. Drake flips that to say, they hold me in this high regard and think they can determine the trajectory of my career or the artistic direction that I end up taking. Nobody can control me, and the issues I have with these people who are criticizing me, it's quote unquote too wild to reconcile. Now, a lot of these bars are also mainly aimed at Diddy because he just punched Drake or something in a nightclub. That's a story for another video, but pay attention to these last bars here. We know that early on in Drake's career, Joe Budden was trying to get a feature with him, but Drake turned him down. Drake raps here, they're hitting my line like, when can I get a favor? Or where's my B at? Like I'm about to tell you where she's been at. Costa Carreras, I got her kidnapped. She ain't sorry and I ain't sorry. It's too late for sorry. We know that Drake and Joe Budden's ex Tahiri took a trip to a tropical island to swim around with dolphins. We know that Joe claims him and Drake slept with a lot of the same women. Here Drake is saying some guy is calling him for favors and asking him where his girl is at. Likely a shot at Joe, but still too subliminal to know. And because of that, this is where we start the show.
I hate that clip right there, man.
Just like Kendrick Lamar, Joe would end up dropping 4 diss records on Drake's head top. On the first one, Making a Murderer, he even raps that he should have done this, quote unquote, 2 Kendricks ago. Now this can mean one of 2 things. We know that at this point in time, it's 2016, Kendrick had released 2 major label studio albums, right? To Pimp a Butterfly in 2015, Good Kid Mad City in 2012. A year before Kendrick Lamar released Good Kid Mad City, Drake was swimming with dolphins with Tahiri, Joe Budden's ex-girlfriend. Maybe the 2 Kendricks Joe is referring to are the 2 Kendrick Lamar albums, meaning that Joe should have been dissing Drake way back in 2011 before Kendrick even dropped Good Kid Mad City. But I think it's actually deeper than that. I think Joe had been paying attention to the subliminal war that Drake and Kendrick were going through and makes reference to it to say that Drake was obviously ducking Kendrick and hiding behind subliminals, right? Never direct with it. Kendrick, on the other end, was quite direct when it came to the 2 times up to that point that he had taken shots at Drake. The first time was on the Control verse, where he obviously mentions Drake by name, and the second time was a couple months later after Drake had a very sensitive reaction to that verse when Kendrick rapped "Nothing's been the same since they dropped Control" and tucked a sensitive rapper back in his pajama clothes. Very obviously targeting Drake there.
Spicy.
Joe is not only saying that he should have taken shots at Drake a long time ago, he's specifically referencing the 2 times that Kendrick Lamar shot at Drake, most likely to highlight the fact that in both the Kendrick and now the Joe situation, Drake kept hiding behind subliminals, kind of ducking the smoke. Now this diss track mainly is about Joe questioning how him criticizing Drake's album could lead Drake to be so sensitive that he'd want to start an actual rap beef over it. Especially when Drake already messed with a lot of women that Joe had dated and Joe was still cool with him. Joe was disappointed that all it took was a little criticism about Drake's music to push him over the edge. But simultaneously, Drake didn't mention anyone by name in that 4 p.m. in Calabasas joint. So a lot of the bars on the first diss track that Joe released were just kind of about calling Drake soft for not coming direct with the shots that he took. You could see here Joe doesn't understand how Drake could sleep with Tahiri and still dap up Joe and everything's cool. Joe lets it slide, but a simple rant about a Drake album has got La Brianna spiraling. Now this diss song contained a lot of sharp wordplay, a lot of double entendres, and a lot of cultural references. You could almost think of this as like Joe's warning shot to Drake, because Joe himself was questioning why everything was so subliminal anyways to begin with. Bars like, "You're so indirect," stuff wasn't really clear, either Jimmy's acting or he really missed a wheelchair. Because obviously back in the day, in Drake's television role, his character gets shot.
I never listened to none of them songs Joe had put out. I might gotta check them out and see. I don't know, I might do a review on them bitches.
Ends up in a wheelchair.
Let me know in
Joe
the
was saying like, is Drake acting here? Is this all fake? What are all these subliminals for? Are they genuinely at me? And if so, does he want to end up like his character Jimmy, lyrically shot up? Or how about where Joe cleverly flips Pusha T's "you're signed to one guy who's signed to another guy" bar by basically telling Drake to stop subbing a real rapper or else this beef will turn into a burger, but also flipping burger with a reference to the Five Guys burger restaurant and the fact that Drake is signed to Five Guys.
So every when you sub real MCs, you get murdered. Since you signed to Five Guys, makes you a burger.
Now another really clever flip is when Joe continues referencing more of the women that him and Drake have in common, integrating these models and bartenders into his sharp wordplay with bars like, "So how you calling out the lyrical god? Your face light up when you see me talking Miracle Watts, cause your words ain't saying a thing. I kill a gram without weighing a thing."
I kill a gram without weighing a thing, nigga, you baiting a kid.
Miracle Watts was a well-known model who both Drake and Joe seemed connected to. Drake even mentioned her 2 years prior on the 2014 song 2 On. So when Joe says your face lights up when you see me talking Miracle Watts, he could be referencing how Drake used to be excited or even nervous just to be around Joe. We saw that earlier in this video when Joe documented the first time they met.
Great hair, great ads. Jennifer Aniston's Lullaby proved it with Roku Ads Manager. Get started on Roku Ads Manager today.
He could also be saying when Drake tries to step up to him or see him, his face lights up like Joe lights him up, aka kills him lyrically, but there's a lot more layers to this bar. Because he ends it saying, "I'm talking Miracle Watts." He could be saying that this woman who Drake used to be fond over now lights up when she sees Joe. Now, Miracle Watts is also the name of a super powerful light bulb, and a watt is actually the unit of measurement for power, which is typically used to display the strength of a light bulb. So, Miracle Watts also turns into a light bulb joke. Your face literally lighting up. And it also ties back to Drake's song, Light Up, with Jay-Z, where Jay warned Drake that rappers would come at him with petty rap feuds, which is the same exact advice that Joe gave Drake the first time they met. Then Joe keeps the measurement theme going. He goes from watts, a unit of power, to kilograms, which measures weight. He raps, "I kill a gram without weighing a thing." And it works like drug scale imagery, since, kilograms get weighed, but it also sounds like kill a gram, not just kilogram, as in Aubrey Drake Graham. And by saying he'll kill a gram without weighing a thing, Joe is saying he doesn't even need to weigh out his options or think twice. He'll kill Aubrey Graham easily. So it's pretty slick wordplay that he had two double entendres related to two different units of measurement and used Drake's last name and Miracle Watts' last name, a woman who seemingly both dated or was linked at one point to both Joe and Drake, as the foundation behind all of this wordplay. Then Joe brings up Jay-Z. Remember in his podcast before the beef even started, Joe was comparing Drake to the modern day Jay-Z. Now he's saying they're both similar in the way that they throw subliminals and don't actually respond to Joe, because if you guys didn't know, Joe had a back and forth with Jay-Z early on in his career, and ultimately Joe's gripe with Jay-Z early on was that he was signed to Def Jam while Jay-Z was the president of the label, and on this bar here he says Jay-Z had blackballed him after their beef, calling him Blacklist Hova. But now we're 10 years past that, and around this time Drake drops Summer 16, where he actually says that he used to want to be on Jay-Z's label until he turned into Jay-Z. So Joe Budden here is saying that he's doing this as a favor to Jay, since earlier in the bar he says that both Jay and Drake are too big to respond to Joe. But it's not just that, Jay-Z was also too big to respond to Drake. So Joe is saying he's doing it for Jay. Now on the fourth verse, yes, this was a 4-verse song, and the first song out of 4 disses that Joe Budden would release against Drake that summer. Joe ends it off by clarifying again that he had no problem with Drake sleeping with Tahiri. This wasn't about that. And in fact, he says that Drake would actually call Joe about women that he was about to get involved with because Joe knew a lot of them already. And according to Joe, well, he says, bad bees, that's what Joe does best. And it's funny because Drake literally flips this 10 years later on his new Iceman album, which we'll get to later in the video. In the meantime, it's Joe's turn to clown Drake for the women that he's been with, or that he wasn't with, because he says that Joe himself had slept with Drake's ex, Bria Miles. And aside from Bria, we know that Drake name drops a lot of some famous, some not famous women in his music that he's been romantically involved with, right? Call up King of Diamonds and tell Black China it'll be worth the flight. We want everything galore, not just Lyra galore. If you were around during the World Star Candy days, you know a lot of these women that Drake was name dropping. And Joe here says that Drake was the first rapper to be a groupie to the groupies. Basically, he was fangirling out over the fangirls. Like a lot of the women that Drake had name dropped in his music had also been romantically involved with other rappers, right? So you could consider them as groupies, I guess, girls that were trying to get closer to the rappers. But Drake was the first one to actually start fanning out over these women who were already fans of the rappers. Joe brags about being quote-unquote first shift at the bars, aka not just that he's firing the bars off at Drake before Drake could fire at him, but he's been with a lot of these bartenders and strippers before Drake dated them. He already made his rounds, but to add on another layer of meaning to these bars, we know that prison guards walk their rounds checking the inmates that are behind bars. Get it? First shift at the bars, he already made his rounds. And Joe continues beating a dead horse, talking about, he's been with a lot of these girls that Drake dated before Drake. But this acts as a triple entendre because here he admits that Drake is at the top of the game right now, right? Even saying that Drake, quote unquote, cooks better than him. In the bar right before he says that Drake is the best MC and the best flower. But if you break down the spelling of the word flower, it spells flour, the key ingredients that chefs use to bake. MC is not just a reference to rappers, but it's also a reference to master chefs. But it gets even deeper than, Joe saying that Drake is cooking better than him, or even the fact that, he loves his leftovers, another play on words related to chefs and food and cooking. It also goes beyond Joe just saying that Drake loves his leftovers in terms of their love life, right? Like Drake constantly dating all these women after Joe's already been with them. It goes deeper. Remember earlier in this video how much Drake said Joe Budden was an inspiration to him. Remember the first battle he ever got in was another rapper accusing him of using Budden's flow. Joe here is saying Drake might be a better...
Up to 50,000 cars added daily on Cars.com. Where to next?
MC today, but it's all off a blueprint that Joe Budden controlling him. And by constantly comparing Drake to being the next Jay-Z, he was almost rooting for Drake to go down a similar path, where he didn't re-sign a $400 million deal with UMG and instead led the culture to feel inspired and empowered going the independent route. And especially on the hip-hop side of things, a lot of Joe's beef with Drake foreshadows what we'd see in the Kendrick Lamar battle later, because the same themes of competition, independence, creative control, they would all reemerge. Kendrick literally said that he kicked off this battle dropping his verse on Future's Like That song because he felt like the genre needed more competition. He wanted to bring the bars back. And ultimately, the battle ended back with the question of independence, similar to the conversation Joe was trying to lead with in his own battle with Drake. A lot of people today are questioning whether Drake truly owns his position or if he's still trapped inside the machine.
I make a pretty good living and I'm happy. See, when I was on Def Jam at the height of my success and my fame, I was miserable. I was fighting every day. And all of those things that I fought with them, I'm looking at hip hop now and I'm able to do those things today. So while, yeah, the Drake disc came out, but it's really reflective for me. It's so much more than that.
Back to Jay's record and where he seems to not be throwing jabs, but perspective to who he is and who Drake is. Can Drake really hit that level with being in this many contracts and signed to this many people to take the torch and lead hip hop the way Jay-Z has to independence? Again, I'm not getting in someone's pockets, but I'm not sure if Drake makes any money off music sales.
He signed to them niggas for life.
I don't know that either. But that boy sure do tour a lot for someone of his success.
Of course.
See, Joe is asking a lot of the same questions that we're still asking 10 years later, right? There were leaked DM conversations where Drake was telling someone that he's a quote-unquote slave to Live Nation, touring relentlessly to potentially recoup that $400 million deal he signed with UMG, the major label, which was a decade after this Joe Budden podcast where he's questioning why Drake was touring so much, if he ever could go a step above Jay-Z as the leader of his respective generation and pull off a monumental move, shifting the culture completely by going independent. And another big point that Joe had was that he wanted to bring it back to the bars and he had no industry relationships stopping him from completely barring Drake to death. So that is exactly what he would do. A week after his first diss track released, Joe would release a second diss track called Wake. And while that first diss track, Making a Murderer, was more of a warning shot with Joe reflecting on his personal relationship with Drake, Wake is more of an assassination of Drake's character. Joe reflects on Drake's shift in persona. Remember, this is 2016, the beginning of the whole revenge era Drake, where he's rapping on darker beats, talking a lot more tough on record, and Joe puts that under the microscope. Drake had a bar back in 2009 about seeing Jay-Z in concert and being scared to ask him for a picture. Now he's on records dissing Jay-Z in the summer of 2016. And it's the same exact thing with Joe Budden. He was praising him back in 2009, talking about, diss me and you'll never hear a reply for it. Now he's sending subliminals at Joe. At the time, streaming was taking over the music industry, and Jay-Z and Drake were low-key kind of going at it behind the scenes because Drake signed a massive deal with Apple at the last minute, even though initially he had allegedly agreed to sign with Jay-Z's Tidal streaming platform. And Joe predicted all this back then before it was public knowledge, saying that Drake felt charged up over his Apple deal, calling out Drake for in 2009 being scared to take a picture with Jay, but now feeling all froggy behind that quote-unquote Apple fix, aka his deal with Apple. This bar is absolutely crazy if you think about the accusations that Kendrick threw at Drake. Remember, this was around the time when Drake was living in Calabasas in the hills, partying a lot. If you look up what DJ Vlad had to say about Drake's parties in Calabasas, you'll understand this bar. I'm not going to dig too deep into it, but you know what Kendrick rapped about on Not Like Us. Here was Joe in 2016 talking about ratchet kids at Drake's Calabasas crib.
I wouldn't be surprised if some shit starts coming out. Well, from what I understand, when Drake first moved to Hidden Hills, they were wilding out in that house. Him and his homies were doing some shit that probably got covered up somehow. You know what I'm saying? And now maybe people got paid. And
maybe they was partying. Not like.
I heard some stories, but and I'm not going to mention them.
I know they was getting it in type shit.
I mean, some things could happen around that if certain people really started to make a lot of noise. But I think
maybe he's paying them off.
I think Drake is just paying them off.
Here Joe is being Joe Stradamus, predicting things years in advance, talking about how Drake was scared of half the Clips, aka one half of the group The Clips, aka Pusha T. Now you know how Kendrick on Euphoria rapped, "There's no accent that you could sell me"? Well, it might have came from this set of bars here. Joe talking about how one day Drake's Canadian, then maybe Asian, Croatian, one day he's sounding Jamaican, depending on what state he's in. It's also a slick shot because a couple years before this song came out, Drake had a song called Connect, where he rapped to a girl saying that, I wish you would learn how to love people and use things and not the other way around, implying that the girl was materialistic and loved things, but used the people around her to get those things instead of, loving people and using things. Joe is saying that Drake does the same thing now in 2016. He loves the UK when he can use or adopt their culture and their sound into his music. He loves Atlanta. He loves Future, McConan, Party Next Door, Quentin Miller. He loves all these people and these cultures until he doesn't need to use them anymore. Joe continues going into detail on how Drake uses artists, leveraging his celebrity status to take waves over. Around this time, Gucci Mane had just got out of jail. Drake immediately does 2 collaborations with him. Joe points out how before that, Drake got on the Migos track Versace and started copying their flow. He also did a remix with Fetty Wap, but never ended up appearing in the music video. Remember, a couple bars before this, Joe was talking about how Drake uses people and loves things. But it's not just people outside of Drake's bubble. Joe questions how Drake uses his artists or even his former artists, right? The Weeknd, Party Next Door, We Want That Party album, but you keep stealing all of Party Next Door's tracks to use for your party album. We know that Party Next Door ghost wrote a lot of the Drake hits around this era. Work with Rihanna, Connect with Travis Scott, Legend off If You're Reading This Is Too Late, I believe, as well. Then Joe points out that Zombie on the Track, who was signed to OVO Sound, hasn't been seen on any of Drake's music since Started From the Bottom, which is a track he produced, building off the theme that Drake uses people to help his brand without returning the favor. And there's also clever wordplay here, because Joe's biggest critique about Views, which kicked off the battle, is that Drake sounded lifeless, right? That he sounded uninspired, like it was a zombie on the track. Joe lists all of these different people that Drake, quote unquote, used, right? Adopted their sound or their writing into his music, and he's saying it just sounds like a lifeless zombie, someone just incorporating other people's work into his own without contributing any real soul to it. The cover art for the song was significant as well, because on Drake's diss track Back to Back a year before, he used a picture of Joe Carter's famous walk-off home run in the 1993 World Series against the Philadelphia Phillies, which is where Meek Mill is from. And of course, Joe Carter was playing on the Toronto Blue Jays. But Joe Budden flipped it perfectly for his Wake album cover, because earlier in that season, the Texas Rangers player, and I'm definitely going to butcher this name, Runej Odor, he punched the Blue Jay star Jose Bautista in the face, and Joe, not being from Texas, so the Texas Rangers don't have any significance to him, is actually instead from New York. But what I find interesting is that, as a Canadian who knows a little bit about hockey, there is a New York hockey team called the Rangers. So yeah, it might be the Texas Rangers here, but it's close enough. So as you can see here, since Traplo Ross did this video like literally 10 years ago, he was able to get all the screenshots of Joe Budden going on a tweeting spree after dropping these tracks, where he was basically begging Drake to come outside, right? Drake had not said a word about this after Joe dropped these 2 monster diss tracks, but it wouldn't take long before Drake would finally somewhat respond. Remember how the initial trigger for Joe to put out that first diss track was the fact that French Montana previewed a new Drake verse on the song No Shopping, where Drake said, "Pump it up." Well, finally on July...
Stop watching this ad. Go to Wix
It's
and
about
grab
how
your
he
domain
said
name
pump it up. Did he say it in a
before someone
disrespectful
else
way?
does.
Oh, he just said it.
July 16th, 2016, French Montana would release that song, and the whole verse would be subliminal shots at Joe Budden. Drake would start the verse rapping, pump it up. She got a good head on her, so I pumped it up. I'm not a one-hit wonder. They know all my stuff. Bringing it back to 10 years prior, when Joe was in the crossfires of a separate Drake battle and he had to basically throw Joe under the bus, calling him a one-hit wonder, he's back doing the same 10 years later. And later in the song, he also raps, calm down, things aren't how they were, take a look around. Calm Down is the name of another track off of Joe's debut album. Otherwise, it's pretty light shots on this track. It's more of a party record, right? Not really what Joe was hoping for, but it wouldn't really matter because just hours after that song would release, Joe would clap back with another diss track of his own. On this track, Joe would be the first one of any rapper to call out Drake for having a sculpted stomach, aka surgically enhanced abs. All of Kendrick's bars talking about, F all that pushing P.
If you don't keep up with that shit, it still could turn into flab and fat, huh? You still gonna have to keep up with it.
Let me see you push a T. You're better off spinning again on him before you think about pushing me. That might have come from these bars, right? Joe rapped, should know I'd kill him at even the slightest push of me, and when his team press up shirts, I'll help him push a T. Should it read, he pressed buttons but wouldn't push a T. Gotta be bugging, maybe he don't know where Pusha be. Or when Pusha pushed the agenda, he isn't pushed to see. If pushed to the streets, I see wound in your physique. Thinking you misunderstood my hood, this isn't Meek. I'm telling you, man, it's like Joe passed this baton of destruction over to Pusha T, who then passed it on to Kendrick. It's amazing to go back to these bars. So about a week after this song, Afraid, Joe drops his final diss track aimed at Drake, Just Because, on July 22nd, 2016. And by this point, there's not much more that he could say about Drake. He does emphasize that, like he previously mentioned, he was responsible for birthing Drake's sound, but that there's a different act that could be credited for each act of Drake's career. Whether it's Party on the Party albums, Weekend on Take Care, Quentin on If You're Reading This Is Too Late, there's a different artist for each era when Drake wants to incorporate new sounds. And that becomes apparent when he says, I can attach different acts to different parts of your style. Yeah, we let you act as if you had parts in your style, but it couldn't be any farther out. Now this line's pretty hilarious and also quite clever, right? So he says, and I'll be sure he's in the secret garden I found with lions, tigers, bears, tahiri, dolphins. Wow. What does this mean? Well, when he says, I'll be sure, it sounds like he's referencing the singer I'll Be Sure, who appeared on Quincy Jones's track called The Secret Garden. You get it? I'll be sure he's in the secret garden I found. Now it's interesting to note that after Joe on his podcast had, went off on Drake's album Views, Drake dropped 4 p.m. in Calabasas, which I'm freestyling this video, so I honestly completely forget if we reviewed 4 p.m. in Calabasas. Drop a comment just for the fact that I'm freestyling this whole thing right now. But yeah, in that...
Sir, that wasn't me. Sir, that wasn't me.
I remember this.
Yo, back off! That wasn't me. That wasn't me.
Somebody chased him down. It was in front of his house, yelling out Drake shit.
All right, I'm sorry. Sir, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yo, chill. Sir, I'm sorry for them. I'm sorry.
That was rock.
I'm sorry. You got. That wasn't me. I wasn't. Okay, I'm sorry.
I keep seeing you tweet. Come on this block again, and I'm gonna hurt one of you niggas.
Okay, I'm sorry.
This is not the internet.
I'm sorry.
I will kill one of you.
I understand. I'm sorry. I apologize for everything.
Do you hear the word?
White kids at that.
I understand.
I got you.
I'm sorry.
Follow me on Twitter though, alright?
Stop, bro.
Y'all think this shit a joke, huh? Would have broke a window just to let them know.
And Drake, of course, being petty, did not respond with a diss track, but instead with his Twitter fingers. Yes, he really followed one of the kids on Instagram who pulled up to Joe's house. He also sent a little jab at Joe at one of his concerts that summer, making a joke that, with all the jabs and disses that Joe had sent his way, maybe all that hard work will pay off and Drake will let Joe come on stage with him and perform his one hit, Pump It Up.
I should have brought Joe Budden up here and let him do Pump It Up one time tonight.
Drake would continue with the jokes, no disses though, as Joe would claim that after all these tracks, Drake actually DM'd Joe, offering a bit of a friendly gesture. Drake invited Joe to one of his sold-out shows at the Madison Square Garden and even said he'd pay him $10,000 if he can release 25 new diss records from the time of that DM until the show on August 4th. Keep in mind, it was like July 22nd when Joe released his last diss track, so Drake was basically saying, can you make 25 more diss tracks in the span of a week? If you can, I'll pay you $10K. Of course, Joe wouldn't take this offer, but what's pretty diabolical is the fact that just a couple weeks after Drake allegedly sent these DMs, at one of his other shows in Detroit, he ends up bringing out Eminem. If you guys didn't know, Joe Budden had been signed to Eminem for many years right before he got independent and started releasing all these diss tracks against Drake. So that was definitely a chess move. Now, if you guys are confused how this entire thing started, the basic timeline is Joe craps on Views on his podcast after Drake just releases it. Then Drake and French Montana tease that No Shopping record where Drake says pump it up. Then Joe releases 2 diss tracks. Then the No Shopping record actually drops. Then Joe drops 2 other diss tracks. Now, of course, Joe would drop his final album in November of 2016, just a couple months after this extremely one-sided battle took place. And after that, it was lights out for Joe Budden, the rapper. He was officially retired, making his way into podcasting full-time and taking on a new role as the co-host of the legendary hip-hop.
So, Joe Budden lobbing straight bars in the direction of Drake, and Drake put out the initial song that sounds like it's a fucking, like it's a paperweight. I mean, it got like Frisbee type bars.
Culture. Navan, the #1 rated business travel platform, lets your team book work travel in one place. Flights, hotels, cars, while staying.
But now, speaking of Kendrick and Drake, Drake would take several shots at Kendrick Lamar on the song Diplomatic Immunity, but that's a story for another video, because he would also be taking shots at Joe Budden and DJ Academics on that track. That was right around the time when Joe Budden had dropped out of Everyday Struggle, quit basically. And Drake reflects on how Joe went from, a rapper he admired to this guy just doing cultural commentary, essentially. He references the fact that Joe was critical over views, talking about Drake slowing down. He says, people looking at me like I'm slowing down. It's opinions over statistics, of course. They're gassed off their journalistic. Come at me and you'll get this ballistic report. But where was that ballistic report 2 years prior when Joe Budden had fired 4 shots at you, right? Well, he continues, right? Remember how Everyday Struggle was on the network Complex. So he raps, stuff is complex like short guys, round tall ladies. This could also be a short jab at Kendrick Lamar. And then, of course, he makes the most obvious reference to Joe Budden by basically saying his last name, rapping, I've seen Budden careers turn to sit around and talk about other careers, judging their peers. Knowledge from guys who did not contribute to none of this here. Of course, Joe went from being a rapper himself to talking about different rappers every day on Everyday Struggle. But Joe was a podcaster at this point, so he was pretty dismissive of this. He actually even said on a prior podcast when More Life had just came out and he thought that Drake was taking subliminals at him, he kind of felt bad at that point. He's like, was I too hard on Drake? Do I owe him an apology? Because remember, Joe and Drake were like kind of friends back in 2012. But the same way Drake had like a subliminal calculated chess move by inviting Joe out to his concert if Joe could drop 25 diss tracks in the span of a week against Drake, and then turn around to invite the boss of Joe Budden's old record label, Eminem, out on stage with him, Joe would have a similar pretty calculated move, because Drake would engage finally in that beef with Pusha T that Joe had been begging for years at this point. This is 2018. And the first interview that Pusha T does to reflect on that beef would actually be on the Joe Budden podcast. Now, he copyrighted that thing, so I cannot play you any clips from it. But Maul, who we now know as Ovi Ho Maul, who is no longer on the Joe Budden podcast, he was on it back then. And he made an interesting statement saying that he believes in rap battles, there should be no limits to what you can say. Which is ironic because now he's talking about UMG should be deleting Not Like Us off of streaming platforms because it was too offensive to Drake. Isn't it funny how Maul and Academic switched up their tone when they were around Joe almost a decade ago when it came to Drake? But anyways, because Drake no longer viewed Joe as a threat, Joe was podcasting at this point, they actually briefly kind of almost became friends. In 2019, Joe would go live on Instagram while he hosted a pool party at his house, playing a bunch of different music, and Drake would pop up in the comments of the Instagram live saying that Joe should play Story of Adidon, Pusha T's diss track against Drake, to see if it would ring off at the pool party, saying that Rob Markman, the journalist, would be the only one who knew the words to it. He also asked Joe to play his diss tracks aimed at Drake at the pool party to see if those would ring off as well. I can't lie, that's some pretty hilarious trolling. But speaking of Instagram Live, it would actually be a year later during the COVID-19 pandemic where Joe and Drake would finally get on an Instagram Live together to chop it up, and Joe was even asking Drake to do an interview with him. And Drake promised that it would eventually happen.
All right, who else we got, man? Come on. We had L, try to give a nice little balance of spiritual shit. There we go. There's Mr. Tootsie Slide himself. Hold up. Come on, you got to talk to more people than just Elliot.
Nah, yo, I can't do this with you right now.
Why?
Because I can't.
Because you're at the embassy?
Scariness of Drake.
It's like I know where this is gonna go.
He ain't got the tough tough guy shit in person.
Why do you think that about me, man? We can have like a smooth talk. You do it with Tory Lanez.
See if you throw some shots while you on live,
buddies.
It's gonna be bad for the brand right now. Oh,
can't even look him in his face.
But all the other OVO dudes kick it with me.
I know. Everybody fucks with you.
You're the only one that like avoids me for some strange reason.
Never avoid you. I just don't see you. We're never in the same place.
Because I'm too broke?
I didn't want to say.
You invited Elliot and B-Dot over there to the embassy. They got to see the Tootsie Slide exclusive. They got to hear Tupac in your bathroom.
Can I have another drink, please?
Look at this. You got a bartender there. Holy shit. Can I have a beverage? I'm parched. Get the fuck out of here.
Yo, go back to your live, man. I'm gonna talk. We have an interview to do for like when the album's ready. I don't want to do this right now.
You've been saying that for a year, and then now I have a whole leaked album with like 30 Drake joints.
That's old shit. That's not the new shit. Don't worry.
All right, fine. Enjoy yourself over there.
I'm gonna be in your comments though. Don't worry.
Yo, but let me ask you, why are you trolling me this way? Honestly, like, you don't think it's hurtful to me?
Why? What do you mean? It's with an encouraging undertone.
Yeah, I'm hanging up, nigga. Bye.
They was flirting with each other. It was all animosity from all the beef and shit.
Nah. All 90,000 of you niggas kick fucking rocks, man. Get out. You niggas got notifications on whenever Drake goes somewhere? Oh my God. See, I can never deal with that. I can't believe some of you people. It's just Joe, nigga. Move. Get out.
Now, what's even crazier is after this in 2021, Kendrick Lamar would hop on Baby Keem's track Family Ties, where he would rap about smoking on your top 5. And just like how Joe years before predicted that eventually Pusha T and Drake would go neck and neck, he was now predicting that Kendrick Lamar and Drake were inevitably bound to battle. Now, shout out to the YouTube channel Geek About It. They got a really dope page. And they were the ones who actually caught the fact that Joe Budden not only predicted that Kendrick and Drake would actually beef, but literally verbatim says these guys are not like us as he's talking about Kendrick Lamar dissing Drake. This was 4 years before Not Like Us.
Kendrick, you can fool them, can't fool me, dog.
Yo, what are y'all talking about? These ain't like us.
The Grammy goes to Not Like Us, Kendrick Lamar.
Like Nostradamus, Joe Budden has predicted oddly specific things that would happen in hip-hop years before they occurred.
I think if you hit Drake too hard, he gonna cry.
Drake, he's going ahead and filed a lawsuit for Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us.
Joe Budden's biggest I told you so moments came with the Kendrick Lamar and Drake beef. 3 years before the Like That verse, he had already called it.
I'm telling you something. I've been saying it for years. They have to address each other.
You think it's gonna really happen?
Why would they do it though? Because you have to. The two niggas tell me a time in where it hasn't happened, where the two dudes at the top don't talk to each other. They have to.
Not only did he predict that these two giants would eventually go head to head, he even described how it would happen and how Drake would be defeated.
Man, if Kendrick and Drake make us wait till 2030 to get whatever the they about to do. Like y'all avoid each other because y'all operate in different spaces, but y'all keep bumping into each other artistically because y'all are that great. You cannot do it.
But at that point, it sounded like a stretch.
Kendrick, you can fool them, can't fool me, dog. Been in this game for years. You can't trick me. You such a student, dog.
He was convinced Kendrick still had that fire, that primal competitive instinct every real MC has.
It's a stone cold killer on the
Kendrick
loose.
probably been writing since these days, saving up for the Drake
years. Kendrick could play all this coy shit he want. He is an animal, threat to society.
To everyone else, that ship had sailed, but Joe Budden didn't buy it.
I still don't see this head-to-head Armageddon shit that you keep trying to predict, you keep trying to will to happen.
This is happening. Armageddon is here.
And what do you know? First-person shooter drops.
Y'all are never getting what you were talking about, that face-off. It's never happening.
And Joe says only one person got to get mad for this to happen.
And that person was Kendrick. What's funny is he had also warned them to never take their eyes off of him.
I don't know when he's coming, but I know he's inserting himself. He's inserting himself in this. And Drake, you better look at him. He's not coming to play with you. Hey, Cole, he heard your album.
Joe Budden would even predict the fate of the Kendrick and Drake battle long before it ever happened, warning Drake that if he pokes the bear too hard, some uncomfortable aspects of his past are going to come out, and we know what that was all about with Not Like Us, right?
Kanye and others started inserting themselves into the drama. Rick Ross dropped a diss track, and Kanye made a Like That remix, promising Kendrick he'd help him take out Drake and J. Cole.
I did do this Like That remix, though. I think that's what you was wanting to lead into. Let me see.
You know we had to get the hooligans up here. We gonna take the
Yo, Dot, I got you.
And believe it or not, Joe predicted that too.
I need for Kanye to move out of the way. It's Kendrick Drake. Kanye move. Justin LeBoy move. You guys have to stop.
Before Kendrick even responded to anything Drake said, Joe had already called his next move. He'd go after that one thing Drake couldn't defend. The uncomfortable rumors that have followed him for years.
No, I'm tired of niggas telling me to shut the up. Every time I'm telling you where some killer conscious nigga's brain is gonna go if you keep playing with that right Bobby Joe, whatever that little girl name, that is weird.
I love him. You know, we just texted each other the other day and he was like, I miss you so much. I was like, I miss you more.
I think if you hit Drake too hard, he's gonna cry.
Drake is bringing legal action against Universal Music Group as a result of Lamar's track Not Like Us, alleging they artificially inflated the popularity of Lamar
project. And just like how Joe's critiques of Views would spawn their year-long beef, his critique of this new For All the Dogs album would kick that beef up into a whole other dimension.
I Mr. Drake that when he dropped, the rappers hit him. Not these little fucking kids. I don't give a fuck about you and Kai Cenat. That's gonna sound like, hey, go find some niggas your fucking age. Hang out with them. Get some of that sauce. His top 10, 20, 30, 40, on his top 50 verses are not on this project. And that's where I recognize I have to let go of Drake. I have to let go. The Drake that I love was the best hook creator, maker, loner outer of in the world. What is the last memorable hook you've heard from Drake? I haven't heard a dominant hook from Drake in a long time. So now you couple that with he don't rap the way that he stay scheming, take care. This is like Yachty rapping. This is like he rapping for the children.
I'm surprised that one took off.
Yo, dog, I had to look up how old this nigga was when I finished listening to the album. You are 36. Your birthday is in 20 days. I googled that too. You are 37 years old. Get the f away from some of these younger niggas and stop f***ing these 25-year-olds. I want to hear adult Drake rapping for adult people. He rapping for the kids, the streams, the Instagram comments, the algorithm.
So as you can see here, Joe was very critical of the fact that Drake was chasing more younger sounds, hanging out with all the young streamers, not making music for people his age, approaching 40, but talking about sleeping with 25-year-olds. Well, yeah, as you can imagine, that triggered Drake. He didn't like that too much. So he writes this massive paragraph in the comments of an Instagram post, which was just the video that I showed you guys of Joe critiquing the album. And Drake is basically saying, like, this guy did not accomplish what he wanted to, right? He wanted to be a successful rapper. He failed at that. So you should not take the opinions of a failed rapper when they're critiquing your art. You guys can pause the video to read the entire thing if you're really that interested. It's a nasty message, to say the least. DJ Academics would later go on to say that he spoke to Drake, and Drake wasn't actually upset that Joe critiqued his music, but instead that he was implying Drake was hanging around, you know, people who were too young to be around. Which is a straight lie, because, I mean, in the message alone, you can read...
Oh my gosh.
Drake is talking about how Joe is not worthy of critiquing his music. So obviously that was a sore spot for him as well. But the whole Joe talking about Drake liking young people thing obviously grew legs of its own, because throughout his battle with Kendrick Lamar, just a couple months after this whole back and forth with Joe, Drake would use Tupac AI vocals on a diss track called Tailor Made, where he would taunt Kendrick into responding to him. This was before Kendrick even dropped Euphoria. And on that track, Drake said, "Call him the B word for me. Talk about him liking young girls. That's a gift for me. I heard it on the Budden podcast, so it's gotta be true." Referencing the fact that Joe on his podcast was talking about Drake should stop sleeping with 25-year-olds. But Drake completely misinterpreted that to say, like, hey, Joe Budden was talking about me liking young girls. Like, you should use that in a diss against me. So the whole Not Like Us blueprint was not only predicted by Joe in 2021, where he literally said these guys are not like us when he was talking about it being inevitable that Drake and Kendrick would eventually go head to head, but it was Drake on Tailor Made being inspired by Joe's comments on his podcast that would basically request that Kendrick talk about him liking young girls. Isn't that crazy how all these things work out? Oh, it was also funny that after Joe's critiques about For All the Dogs, even though Drake would tell Academics that, you know, he didn't care that Joe was critiquing the album. Joe could say whatever he wants about his music. He just doesn't like that, you know, Joe was talking about Drake liking young girls. Drake would actually a week later release 5 new songs that he claimed he recorded after For All the Dogs already released. They were all straight bars, so you know he was responding to the critics who were talking about, you know, he didn't have enough bars in the album. And on that album, there were multiple shots aimed at Joe, specifically on the song The Shoe Fits, where he talks about this girl who is dating presumably James Harden, saying you lost your girl to the sniper. And we know that both Drake and Joe's love interest at one point, Tahiri Jones, had been romantically involved as well with James Harden. Anyways, after the whole Kendrick and Drake beef, Drake would create a new Instagram account called Plot Twist where he'd post a bunch of random pictures. On that Instagram account, he posted a picture of Joe Budden, not looking so flattering, looking like he's, been eating a little too much. His gut is a little too big. And Joe would respond by going on his podcast saying, you got 100 different rappers firing at you. Don't fire at me. I wanted to, have this little tango with you 10 years ago when you were lit and it was fun. You're a corpse now. You're dead. I'm not going back and forth with a corpse.
Drake, don't shoot at me now that you ice cold. I'm not doing it back and forth with a corpse. I wanted to do it when you was lit. It was fun. Don't go get shot all through the year and then pop up like Bernie at Weekend at Bernie's wanting to shoot at me now. No, nigga. Go spin. Spin the fucking block.
Drake would respond to this in the best way he knows how to, pitting the women in his opposition's life against them. What he would do is release a collab album with Party Next Door in 2025. He'd have a song on there called Gimme a Hug, and on that song he said, Melissa Ford, you're a legend from the 6. Hate to see you with a D-sucker. Melissa Ford is someone who is from Drake's hometown of Toronto, but she was also a co-host on the Joe Budden podcast. Drake is basically saying here, you're great, but it sucks that you're next to a D-sucker. Putting her in an awkward position because, yeah, she might be happy she was, praised in this Drake song, but she's sitting next to his op on this podcast all the time. So can she be happy about the song? Can she celebrate it?
I think that will ruin her relationship with Joe. That nigga ended up getting rid of her like a few months after that shit because she went to put it all on her Instagram. Like she was loving it too much. He was like, oh, yeah.
That muddy the waters in her professional relationship with Joe Budden. And it definitely did seem to ruffle some feathers on the podcast. They at one point called Melissa Ford out for embracing the song, putting it all over her Instagram. Meanwhile, she's sitting next to the guy that Drake was calling a D-sucker, right? It puts her in an awkward predicament.
It was a tool initially to get under Joe's skin, but it was still a tool that you fell into. It was still a marketing tool.
I didn't fall into anything.
And then you tried to dress it up as, yo, I'm being celebrated, so allow me to be celebrated at the detriment of your boss.
How is it the detriment to him?
Because it was an insult, yo, Melissa Ford, you around a dick sucker. It was an insult to him.
He never says his name.
If that's the angle you go with, I have to respect that and I yield.
It's the only angle.
At the same time, I also believe that Drake was selling hoodies with her face on it. And when you click the link to buy the hoodie, it actually led to Joe Budden podcast's Patreon account. So he was playing all type of war games with Joe at this point. And whether or not this actually caused a strain in Joe's relationship with Melissa Ford, who knows? But she would end up leaving the Joe Budden podcast just a couple months after this. And at this point in the story, Drake would kind of get the last word in terms of disses at least. Because on Iceman, yet again, he's firing at Joe. If this video made you believe that, Drake and Joe's issues deep down stem from the fact that they were both romantically involved with the same...
That's usually what it's always about.
Enduring quality.
The same shit.
New York attitude.
Same women. Drake would kind of echo that sentiments on the song Make Them Remember off Iceman, where he rapped, I watched the scouts spaz him with a puzzled face. Who knows which one of his bubble-shaped tings I must have ushered through the double gates, showed her the time of her life while broski having stomach aches, hearing about good times at Lover's Lake, and send her back to you while you're sleepwalking in another state. You'll live to see another day. This is hilarious because Joe Budden apparently has a sleepwalking issue, and at one point he was actually sleepwalking naked and rang his neighbor's doorbell naked in his sleep. Drake here is saying, like, this guy's face is all puzzled up. Who knows which one of his quote-unquote bubble-shaped tings, aka, a woman with likely a BBL, some big features. Who knows which one of the dozens of those I took to quote-unquote Lover's Lane, like which one of those women I took to my place, showed her the time of her life, then sent her back to him who's in another state, aka not just another state in the United States, but also in another state of mind because he is sleeping but walking through his neighbor's apartment naked. pretty great set of bars here, but it's a 10-year rebuttal to Joe talking about Drake chefing up with his leftovers, right? And Joe took the high road, actually saying that, you know, he loved the album. And if I had to guess, I don't think that their issues stem specifically from women. I think it's a multitude of things. It's a very nuanced situation. I think that Drake was always mad that of all the different rappers who have studied his career, Joe may have known his music the best and was always the most honest. The first time they ever met, Joe predicted that Drake would eventually end up responding to all these different rappers dissing him. Then he predicted that Drake's album Views might have been artistically the peak of his career. Then he dropped 4 diss tracks against Drake and gave Pusha T and Kendrick Lamar the ammo they needed on their diss records, but did so 10 years prior. He even predicted the literal fact that both Pusha and Kendrick would eventually go toe-to-toe against Drake. But it wasn't all negative. Joe also predicted the positives. While Academics in 2017 was telling Joe that Drake had no unilateral classics, Joe would go on to say that Take Care was not, but would later be considered a classic when it was all said and done. He predicted that Drake should go up against Pusha T years before when Drake was battling Meek, saying that Meek was too easy of an opponent. By 2021, when Drake was dropping Certified Lover Boy just weeks after Kanye West, he was saying that Kanye was too weak of an opponent and that Drake deserved to go up against someone like Kendrick. Then Joe came full circle from, you know, his Views criticism.
Him and Kanye wouldn't have been good. Kanye would have been singing and getting songs from other people. And
his whole beef with Drake started because he was talking about that album lacked depth, but 10 years later, he pokes the bear even further on For All the Dogs by saying that that album lacked maturity. And his comments about that project stung so hard that it may have been the canon event to inspire the subject matter of Not Like Us, the most detrimental blow to Drake's career in history. And the irony is, years before Kendrick versus Drake was anything more than just a subliminal war, Joe was begging for it to happen and said, quote unquote, these guys are not like us. And now, while Drake is seemingly at his lowest emotionally, Joe is actually supporting him, praising his new album. So at this point, it seems like Joe Budden knows Drake better than Drake knows himself.
I was just about to say, I could see them two getting back cool and talking about this on their podcast or some shit, because Joe Budden's so fake here. He gonna be like, nah, we'd love to have Drake come on and talk about it. So, you know, they're just all content, really. But who knows? Drake probably hate them niggas for real and would never talk to these niggas ever again, man. We'll see. Y'all put in the comments and let me know if I'm tripping, man. Like, comment, subscribe while you at it.
Do it for the boy, just do it for the boy, do it, do it,